For this third video, I wanted to talk a little bit about the readings, which we can pick back up in our class session this upcoming Tuesday. But I also just wanted to describe a little bit about why I chose these three essays for this reading, and then touch upon a few themes that some of you wrote about in your reading responses, which are brilliant as usual. So, as you can tell, all three of these touch on the themes of trauma and then how to write about it, or how to write about, on, or around sensitive subjects. And what I found to be quite interesting is that all three authors approach this in a really different way, as to be expected. It's an anthology of pretty diverse voices and people coming at the issue from different perspectives, from academia, from critical analysis, and from personal anecdote. So the first, trying to get back to my first page, Chip Livingston's essay, Funny You Don't Look Like My Preconceived Ideas of an Essay, page 39. He right away shows us what he will be talking about in a slightly funny tone that then falls away a little bit through the essay. The essay, it's not necessarily as pithy and amusing as the title. And then he shows us his analysis of the lyric essay, or a demonstration, saying here's why he wants to write a lyric essay, and then 3 examples, and then his own example. And it's structured in a interesting manner. Some of the sections I found to be more successful than others, and I feel like it's a really useful essay, and it's really demonstrative. It shows us lots of different shapes that the lyric essay can take, and then he brings it back to his own writing experience, and how an essay that he wrote about his dog in heat could be a poem, could be an essay, and he submitted it as one, and then it got accepted as a poem, and then the editors changed that to publishing it as an essay. So talking about the overlaps between different forms. So overall, I think it's an illuminating essay in that he shows us all of these methods and examples. I almost feel like he could have changed the title or cut part of the section of the section called conclusion, where some of that language does feel a little too expository. Like, here is what I am doing in this essay. I started out by discussing how I learned to slip in and out of different identities. So it's an interesting content, but the way he writes it, maybe he's writing it in a way that's tongue-in-cheek, like, here's how we learned how to write essays in high school and college. Write a conclusion. So it's an interesting, if it's tongue-in-cheek, then I buy it. If not, I almost feel like that paragraph he could have cut, because I think we understand by that point what his aim is. Then, and I'm going to talk more about all 3 of these. I'm just rushing through a little bit so that I don't run out of time in this essay. Lewis's essay, I don't know if anyone in this particular group has attended AWP. I feel as though you have, and maybe I even saw you there. I go every year, probably will not go this spring. And I'm always attending across the board seminars and workshops on pedagogy, creative writing, novel writing, how to edit, small press publishers, all sorts of things. And often they do include some sort of small or short writing exercise. And I thought that Lewis's essay was so fascinating. It was really a specific seed around which all of this personal excavation, and then also an analysis of the form. The seed is just that one activity, the writing activity in a writing workshop at a conference. And then from that, he has all of this investigation to do, this inquiry, self-inquiry and inquiry of the literary world and trauma and colonizers and decolonizers and the process and all of that entails. I also found it interesting that he sort of reclaims parentheses. I've had a lot of colleagues and former professors who hate parentheses and tell everyone they should cut parentheses and that it's distracting. But I think that Lewis uses them in a really effective way, in that he's like reclaiming that use of the parentheses as embedded stories, little nested stories and confessions, and in the parentheses is where he gives us the most raw and violent recollection of his childhood. And usually those are contained within those the bookends of the parentheses. And isn't it fun to watch a video of someone turning pages? Lapointe, this essay I found I was the most drawn to this essay in the sense that it felt comprehensive, but also more nuanced, in that she's analyzing her own writing, the writing of someone else, the translations of her great-grandmother and then her great-aunt, but also cultural myth, the use of myth and fairy tales in nonfiction. And so she really is bringing together a lot of disparate ideas and also different genres and different practices, but all around this essay that she brought, Little Boats, to her first MFA writing workshop. So similar to Lewis's, where it's all of these ideas and inquiry revolve around that one early draft of what now is, she mentions, becomes a manuscript of her traumatic experience, and then how to write about it or write around it. So all of these essays, I think, are asking a question that all of you are probably asking, or we can talk about together, that the question of the lyric essay, and then stretching outside of that, okay, lyric essay, sometimes they look like poems, sometimes they look like prose poems, sometimes they look like hermit crab essays in the form of shopping lists or Tinder profiles or whatever form the hermit crab essays take. So how do we differentiate between these forms, and how can we purposefully be writing an essay about essays or an essay about our writing and make sure that it's an essay? Well, some of that's subjective. To give you an example of how hard these terms are to define. So I took a few classes with John D'Agata, who's mentioned many times throughout these essays, who has, he teaches about the essay. That's his shtick. He's like the essay guy. And he collected these huge packets of Xeroxed essays from all sorts of different sources. And many of them looked like poems. Many of them had lots of white space, gaps, quotations. Some of them were a single sentence. Some of them were 15 pages long. Some of them were book-length essays. And he called all of these lyric essays. However, I do think that he used a few qualifications that narrow the world of the essay a little bit, that I think are useful, and particularly for all of us as we're starting to write our critical essays or essays in general as you're writing this semester, that we can employ. So first of all, essay, nonfiction, meaning you can incorporate fiction in a similar manner to Lapointe, who writes about myth, fairy tale, and fantasy and the imagination within the frame of a personal, true essay. So it's her essay, I would say, has personal elements, critical elements, and also fiction, in the sense of writing about and writing through a traumatic experience using fiction, using fantasy and myth, both her own myth, her own imagined storytelling, and also that of her great aunt, Aunt Susie, I think. So it's not that the whole piece is fiction. I would say that maybe that line is harder to define. Maybe the piece that she writes about in this essay, I just want to make sure I'm not getting the title wrong, Little Boats. The piece that she's writing about, which is more personal memoir, I would say, which is true, that piece might sit right on the line between truth and fiction, because she expands into the imaginative realm using myth, using invention and imagination and dissociation. But this essay, Fairy Tales, Trauma, Writing into Dissociation, the essay itself is an essay. It's true. It's creative nonfiction about her practice and her own writing in writing the imagination, writing dissociation, writing through trauma, about trauma. So the essay itself is true and nonfiction. And she cites other authors. She uses citations. She refers to the writings and translations of her family, and also refers to this context of the MFA workshop. So she's citing true events and things that happened in a pretty straightforward manner. And then she also includes the stylistic and lyric paragraphs and moments in the essay where she expands into that imagined and fantasy manifestation of the dissociation of trauma. So I hope that makes sense. It's a true essay. It involves research, but it also includes some fiction and fantasy and imagination. But that's one characteristic of an essay that I think is fairly important and hard to define. True. What is truth? Whose truth? Who owns the truth? But for your own purposes, in short, we in this essay need to be writing what we believe to be the truth based on our own experience, our observation, our research. So as difficult as that is to define, essays are nonfiction. Okay, so that's one characteristic. Another would be, and I think this is maybe more fun to discuss and also a little more inspiring and not so nitty-gritty, like, okay, what is truth and what isn't? But this other characteristic is that an essay, the writer of an essay, doesn't necessarily know what the result is. They don't know the answer. They're asking a question or a series of questions, 1, 3, 10, 1 million questions, an ever-evolving question, who knows? But those questions don't necessarily have to resolve themselves by the end of the essay. And also there's an aspect of humility of an essay writer, that they're admitting that they are trying to get to an answer, and maybe they do. Many authors of essays do find the answer in the process of writing and researching their question. And many essays include that, some sort of resolution or conclusion or some type of an answer. Many essays don't. But the whole point is that the essay shows that inquiry and that investigation. It's about the process of trying to answer these questions. And I don't know who originally used this phrase. I know that my former prof, John D'Agata, wrote this many times and spoke about it in class, but I don't think he came up with it. The essay is evidence of a mind on the page. So basically, the author is thinking about a topic, a question, and writing their thought process, basically, about trying to answer this question. And that can be straightforward, such as, I wonder, I'm just making this up, I wonder about, let's see, what's a topic I've been thinking about? Eels. I recently read a chapter in a recently published book, The Book of Eels. And in this book, they talk about the eel question, which is sort of an age-old scientific inquiry of um, how like the stages of development of an eel, how they migrate, when and how. And my question that I could write an essay about is, how do eels, what's the like internal or external trigger that sends an eel back to its homeland or breeding grounds in the White Sargasso Sea? Which I can talk more about later, or you can read the Book of Eels. It's an amazing question, but it's a question that I don't know the answer to, and I also think it's not answered in that book. So it would be a question that I would have to go out and find research about, either conduct research or analyze a number of other texts. But in the beginning of the essay, I would be humble and admit, here's something I've been wondering about and reading about, here's my personal experience, and here's some research. And then by the end of that essay, I may or may not find the answer. So that's the other characteristic of an essay that I would count. So far, I've only talked about two. I know I'm rambling. One, some element of truth. An essay should be true, creative nonfiction. And that's, again, there's some like fuzzy borders around that question. The second characteristic of an essay should be that it shows the author trying to answer a question, the process of asking and answering a question. And once again, they don't necessarily have to come to the answer by the end. So that's two that can help us narrow down the broad field of essays. That's essays in general. So within that broad umbrella of essay, we also have the lyric essay. We also have the critical essay. And I described, I think in my previous video, and maybe also in one of the interactive Google Docs, that there can be overlap between the lyric and critical essay. Some critical essays are lyrical. I would say that all three of the essays that we read for homework, Livingston, Lewis, and Lapointe, and also I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing any of their names, I'm not sure, that these three essays are critical and they are intertextual, and they would certainly qualify for all of the guidelines that are set forth for the critical essay in this class and for this institution, in that they involve the writer investigating their own writing or writing about their own writing and their writing craft, other writers with examples, close readings, quotes, and citations. And I lost my train of thought because I had a panic moment of thinking I hadn't pushed record. I did. And they're also lyrical because they have a sort of a personal, magical, or all of them are different in the sense of, I would say that Livingston's approaches lyricism because he includes poetry, he includes a long passage from his essay poem about his dog in heat, somewhat lyrical, and yet it's also critical because he's using that as an embedded text for the purpose of answering a question. Lewis's essay, I would say, is lyrical in the sense that he samples a bunch of different writing techniques, in and out of parentheses. He also wanders back and forth in chronological time. The workshop where, at the conference, where someone proposed that they write about their childhoods, and then back to his childhood, recollecting why it's so difficult for him to answer this writing prompt, and then back to the present moment, and then sort of ending with a broad, timeless question of how to write about trauma and what it means and how to take care of oneself. That's not really how he ends. I'm just trying to remember his final paragraph. I think of the days of sleeplessness and exhaustion. I think that one day I'll figure out how all of this happened. It's not a definitive end or conclusion. It's pretty open-ended and broad, and many essays do that, and lyrical essays too. And then Lapointe's essay, I would say, is a little more straightforward, but has some lyricism in the sense that she describes some of the metaphors and imaginative spaces that she explored in her writing, and also includes the comparison to her aunts, her great aunts, writing about being taken by the Salmon people, and a lot of that is lyrical, even though it is housed within critical analysis. So, long story short, there was a ramble about these 3 essays and also the lyric essay and how your critical essays can involve lyricism, and the 2 characteristics of an essay that I think we need to involve in our essays that we're writing this semester, of nonfiction, truth, and a mind on the page, a mind investigating or answering a question. It's hard to distill that into like a punchy sentence, but I hope that you know what I mean. All right, well, there you go. That's video number 3. See you on Tuesday.